what is the future of Europe? And I think the reality today, as many of us would recognize, is that the EU has become a microcosm of many of the world's most pressing problems, whether it be the threat of terrorism, whether it be an unstable neighborhood driven by the dangers of geopolitics as well as failing states and lack of good governance, whether it's dramatic flows of migrants and refugees, slow growth, high debt, the rise of populist parties, and I suppose I need to say it here as the Brit, the possible threat of a Brexit, of an exit of the UK from the EU, a difficult and very specific distraction. The World Economic Forum has a Global Agenda Council on Europe, which released a paper which has been released around here at the Congress Center and online today, talking about Europe, what to watch out for in 2016-17, chaired by Carl Bildt. And if I could just quote for our panel here the opening sentence, it says that the EU seems to be moving from one emergency to the next. Europe's leaders are in crisis-fighting mode, reactive, improvising, often uncoordinated, but, and it would say this, ultimately partially successful, or modestly successful. And I think on the positive side, we must recognize that much of the EU economy has stabilized. Jobs have been created, in fact, at a faster rate than the United States. And EU governments are finally moving to deal with the refugee crisis. But I think one of the themes I want us to be able to explore here today on this panel is the loss of trust. There's been a loss of trust after the Eurozone crisis between governments, between peoples, within EU countries, between voters and parties, which makes it all the more difficult to handle these problems. Let me turn, therefore, to what is a distinguished panel we have with us here. I will be starting with the Prime Minister of France, Manuel Valls, and then turning to Prime Minister Rutte, who is, as Prime Minister of the Netherlands, holding the presidency of the European Council at this time. We have the Prime Minister of Greece, Alexis Tsipras, the Finance Minister of Germany, Dr. Schäuble, and Emma Marcegaglia, the Chairman of the Board of Eni, the Italian energy company. Let me start, if I may, Manuel Valls, with possibly one of the biggest challenges to Europe right now, which is actually one of security. We are in a tragic period following the terrorist attacks on November 13th in Paris. One of the worst attacks, not only in France, but in Europe, from terrorists. Do you believe that this is going to drive Europe apart, or can it drive the European Union closer together? Are there responses that are being taken, that can be taken, in your opinion, within the EU, that will help ensure that this crisis is not something that splits Europe, but helps it come together? Your thoughts on that first point?
No.
Terrorism must bring Europe closer together, and I'm convinced of this because it concerns all of us. It's not just Paris that was struck. In the past, terrorist attacks have taken place in Denmark, Belgium, and I don't forget, of course, what happened in London and Madrid about 10 years ago. So we are at war against terrorism. I believe we are at war, a world war, a global war, and we, as Europeans, must be able to face up to this. Naturally, we need the means to do so. Every country needs the means to fight terrorism, to ensure its security, the security of its population, but we need to have means in common. We have to find these, especially by exchange of information, by exchange of intelligence, by having a program for a common program for oversight of flights and airports. So we have to give ourselves all the necessary means. Obviously, I cannot go into much detail because we don't have much time and there are certain rules to follow here in this exchange. Security and terrorism are going to be and are part of the major challenges of Europe. I am a deeply European person because of my status, my origin. I'm Prime Minister of France, but I'm sure that Europe can move ahead and can mature and grow its policy, not just in decades of time, but it can only do so if we can face this challenge of security and if we can pool our means to fight against terrorism, not only in Europe but also outside of Europe. We need a common policy. We have the crisis of refugees, and the public opinion can very well mistake this crisis of refugees with a security issue. We have forgotten that there are frontiers, and we have forgotten that there are historical problems.
Quickly on one particular point, given France's active involvement in fighting terrorism in Syria, could you foresee in the coming years the need for EU forces to be deployed, potentially to Libya, to Syria? To how actively involved is Europe going to have to become in a neighborhood which is so proximate yet so dangerous? Where's your opinion on this particular issue?
I think in general what we need is more of Europe rather than less of Europe, and that will be part of the debate. After the attacks on the 13th of November, I would like to thank all those that have organized meetings and demonstrations of solidarity, and thank all those countries that have agreed to help France also abroad in the Sahel and in Mali. But Europe has to understand that its fate is very close at hand. It's only 2 hours away. In Africa, for example, we cannot we cannot abandon Africa and Sahel to terrorism. We have a total disorganization in Libya. We have the migration crisis, the one that is moving from Syria to Europe. And then we also have this flow from Libya into Europe. And we have to have the means to intervene with our allies, our partners, through diplomacy, by acting together on the military plane, by intelligence. And this has to be done throughout Europe, from the north to the south. The Mediterranean problem, the crisis in Syria, is not only something that concerns the Mediterranean countries, Spain, Italy, Greece, France. It concerns absolutely everyone. So we have to move away from this selfishness and give ourselves the means to meet up to this historic challenge.
To Prime Minister Rutte, Mark Rutte, you put at the top of your list of priorities for the Dutch presidency of the European Council a comprehensive approach to migration and international security. And at the heart of that, I imagine, is going to have to be rethinking Schengen. I think it was Jean-Claude Juncker who said Schengen kind of is Europe. And yet, if Schengen is Europe, how could European leaders have developed a system for open borders internally without a system for stronger external borders on the outside? This was a fair weather policy, it strikes me, and rather dangerous to put fair weather policies at the heart of Europe. What do you think can be done in the near term? Donald Tusk has talked about 2 months to get things organized. What can be done in the near term to manage another year?
Well, first of all, I am in complete agreement with Donald Tusk that we need to get a grip on this issue in the next 6 to 8 weeks. And the reason is that when spring comes and the numbers of refugees coming out of Turkey and Lebanon and other countries through Greece into the rest of the European Union, through the West Balkans, we see today that in the first 3 weeks of this year, there were 35,000 people crossing the sea from Turkey into Greece. Last year, it was only 1,600 in the full month of January. Now 35,000 in the first 3 weeks of this year. And this is winter. So when spring comes and the numbers will quadruple, it will go up considerably, we cannot, as a European Union, at least for the Netherlands, for Germany, for other countries, we cannot cope with the numbers any longer. So we have to get a grip on this. So this is the immediate agenda for the next 6 to 8 weeks. This has to do with making a success of the EU-Turkish agreement, making a success of building the hotspots and the reception facilities in Greece and in Italy, making a success of the relocation system within the European Union. Your question is about Schengen. I mean, Schengen is crucial. a lot of our wealth, of our economic potential has to do with the fact that we have open borders. But we do also have a system called Dublin. The Dublin system has to do with how we deal with the influx of migrants into the European Union. And that Dublin system at the moment is not working. So before we kill Schengen, we first have to make Dublin work and to reform the Dublin system. That is what we have to do. And nobody wants to get rid of Schengen. Nobody wants to do that. But you are totally right. If Schengen is only a fair weather system, then it cannot continue. But it is not. I do believe we can save Schengen as long as we get a grip in the next 6 to 8 weeks. And then we have to implement all the Commission proposals on collectively controlling the outside borders, Frontex, voluntary resettlement schemes and all that. All these proposals are on the table. But that is for the month after. First, now we have to fight the immediate crisis. Again, an immediate crisis, I'm sorry. This is the European Union. We have to fight this immediate crisis of these huge numbers of refugees flowing into Western Europe.
If I could turn now to Prime Minister Tsipras, because one could argue the last thing Greece needed on top of the economic crisis that it's been facing was this huge influx of refugees, migrants, people passing through. But so far they've been passing through Greece. To the extent that Dublin is reformed or Schengen is remanaged, or suspended if it is, or if new border controls emerge nationally, this pressure could get even stronger for Greece. And yet Greece has been resistant, in my understanding, to Frontex, to some of the EU-wide proposals to try to support the country. I think you're more open to it now, but what was the source of the reticence? And how do you think Europe could support Greece going forward?
Greece is not reticent, nor is it reluctant, but we have to realize what the true problem that Greece is faced with and the EU is faced with. Well, Europe is faced with a triple crisis. It's faced with an economic crisis. We haven't escaped that yet, and the impact of the economic crisis is major. The repercussions of this crisis are leading to the creation of inequalities. As a result thereof, there are political risks. There may be a rise of populism and extreme right-wing parties in Europe, and this will tear Europe. There's the refugee crisis, and there's also an instability crisis. Coupled with the terrorist attacks, these all create new sources of risk and instability. Unfortunately, my country, Greece, has found itself at the heart of two of those three simultaneous crises that are taking place in Europe. And our objective is to turn Greece into a part of the solution. We want to turn it from part of the problem into a part of the solution. And so when it comes to the refugee issue, what is happening in the Aegean as we speak is a great shame for our common European culture and civilization. On a daily basis, we are faced with a death toll. People are losing their lives in the seas of the Aegean because the traffickers are working there unimpeded. And it's inconceivable for countries, two countries such as Greece and Turkey, two countries that in the previous years invested dozens of millions of euros in military equipment and armaments, two countries that have huge army systems in order for them to check upon one another, in order to have dogfights over the Aegean. It's a shame to have that and to be unable to check what's going on in our seas. And I have to tell you that now we are faced not just with proposals for, you see, yes, we are looking forward to working with Europe, but the problem is that Europe has to decide upon the strategy it's going to opt for with a view to solving this problem. Should we think along the lines of each working on their own and providing individual solutions? Is this a tendency according to which we should be dealing or not dealing with anything that's not in our backyard? Or should we acknowledge that this is an international issue? This is a pan-European crisis. This is the biggest flow of people ever since World War II. This refugee crisis regards us all. Europe cannot be an a la carte union. We can't just expect to share in the benefits and expect some who are dealing with trouble to assume responsibility and deal with the impact. And of course, someone could just suggest now that the transit countries are faced with an issue and the destination countries are faced with a problem. Greece is at the heart of the problem, and Germany and the Netherlands are also at the heart of the problem. But if we want to have a Europe of solidarity, where the burdens and responsibilities will be shared amongst all of us, then we have to agree that we need to work together. We have to share the burden, all of us together. We have to do something in unison. What is called for is a mechanism that will help relocate the refugees from Turkey and the Greek islands towards the rest of Europe. I'm not just referring to specific countries. We have to include all EU member states in this mechanism, and we have to do that in order to put an end to the trafficking of human beings through the Aegean. And we have to do that to show the refugees and convince them that eventually they will be dealing with a legitimate mechanism, and there's hope for them. And there's also what is needed to be done is to put in place a relocation mechanism that will work both ways and resettlement eventually. But all European countries have to share the burden. I think this is the only solution.
Thank you very much for making those very concrete suggestions, especially towards the end. Let me turn to Minister Schäuble. You also served as Interior Minister prior to taking your position up as Finance Minister. And I suppose, could I first ask quite a practical question? You know Germany extremely well. Can Germany cope with another 1 million asylum seekers in 2016 or refugees? And if not, what do you want from the rest of the EU in the near term, in the next 2 to 3 months, as Mark Rutte was saying, to help Germany in that sense?
The question of how long we can cope with such an inflow of this magnitude is a question I don't even want to reply to. We all agree that the inflow, this flux, is too high, and we now have to concentrate on how to revert this situation. I think that what is most important is for us to invest billions into those regions from which the refugees come, to reduce the pressure on the external frontiers of Europe, to make sure that Europe does not become into a fortress. As Mr. Tsipras said, it's a disgrace for Europe if it were to become a fortress. So the pressure that is exerted on these external frontiers has to be reduced, and that will cost Europeans much more than we thought. We felt that, okay, there are all sorts of problems in Africa, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, in the Middle East, and something has to be done, but it's not really our problem. But we have to realize that it is our problem. It is a problem for and of Europe, because everything that goes wrong in these regions is not going to simply end up in Canada, it's going to end up in Europe. So there's a lot that we will have to do. We've spoken a lot about distribution mechanisms in Europe. And at every meeting of the finance ministers, I repeat that we simply have to make sure that everyone does what they can. We maybe have more financial strength to do something, and I think all the European partners can intervene in these regions which are in difficulty in order to reduce this pressure that is exerted on the external frontiers. We have the Dublin system, and we do have a frontier between Europe and the rest of Europe. But we also have to have some solidarity with other countries that have these external frontiers, this border. on the limit of Europe. If we don't get a grip on this in Europe, it's going to be a real problem. Now, I think that in all the discussions that we have, we seem to hear that we're only managing crises in Europe, but that's also true for the rest of the world and in economic terms as well. And managers have crises to deal with. But what Europe has to do is give itself the possibility of acting. And it's not acceptable to think that the alternative will be the destruction of Europe. We have to ensure and guarantee security. If we can guarantee security, then we can have democratic systems. If we don't have them, they'll be endangered. I agree entirely with Prime Minister Valls when he says that we don't say war in Germany, but there is a threat weighing on us from international terrorism, and it's asymmetric. And we can only fight this, combat it together if we have a common foreign policy. And this has to become more efficient in Europe.
Thank you, Dr. Schäuble. Let me turn to Emma Marcegaglia now. As a business leader, you rely, as do other businesses, on an integrated Europe. It's delivered great benefits over the years. How concerned do you think the business community is by the potential fragmentation of Europe in the face of this particular crisis, the one to do with migration and security? Would this have a deep impact on business? How much are you talking to governments about this particular topic?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I want also to say that I have also the honor to chair Business Europe, which is the European association that gather together all the national business associations. So our point of view is very clear. We think that a fragmentation of Europe on this issue, but I would say on all the most important issues that Europe is facing, would be a total disaster. We need to stay together. We have a clear position on this, saying that we have to face this problem together. What we have seen until now is that, yes, there has been some improvement, some instruments are there altogether, but sometimes what we see is that sometimes you have national approach. You see that sometimes there is a prevailing of the problem of a single nation, of a single state. But what we need is very clear, is a European approach. We are facing a lot of problems. You said that before. There is a problem of immigration, there is a problem of refugees, there is a problem of terrorism. The answer is to go back to our common values. The answer is to act together. Also, if we think about what's going on also in the economy, thinks about what's going on in the emerging markets, there is a lower growth going on, thinks about the oil price, thinks about what we are seeing now on the financial markets. The answer to all this is not nationalism, is not thinking inward, only thinking about the national electorate, only thinking about the national problem. The real answer is to act as a whole. So we are concerned because sometimes we see, as I said, prevailing national approach, and we want to fight this because this is very clear for us. We want more Europe. The answer to a lot of problems is more Europe, is not less Europe.
Well, Mark Rutte, you're hearing there a demand for more Europe from Business Europe, from the chairwoman of this organization. Your second priority of your presidency was, I think, Europe as an innovator, as a job creator. What would you put then at the top of the list of priorities to be able to support business, support jobs, support growth?
Well, here we have this strange situation in which we talk about a European common market, which is only there to a certain extent. Only 35% of the European economy is part of the European common market. 65% is not. Digital, services, energy, capital, it's all not part of the common market. So what we will try to do in the next 6 months is to give a push, particularly in the areas of the digital common market, in the area of the services directive and the implementation of that, how to open up the professions which are still in many countries protected, and they are an impediment to growth and success. We know from a study that 1.25 trillion euro extra GDP will be added to the European Union if we do this. This is twice the Dutch economy. The Dutch economy is the 5th economy of the Eurozone, the 6th economy of the European Union. We could add twice the Dutch economy if we would do this. So here we will work very hard together with businesses and find the low-hanging fruit, because we know that from the Commission, from Parliament, from the Council, we could make a push, for example, in the areas of geo-blocking, copyright, like the protected professions. We could make real progress in the next 5-6 months. And I think this is key, because Europe, you have always two issues. One are the issues which are unavoidable, like fighting crises, the economic crisis, the situation in Greece, which we had to tackle in 2015, and now the refugee crisis. But much more important are the issues where the European cooperation is beneficial, where it adds value. And sometimes the unavoidable is taking away the sight, the view of what we could achieve in the area of the beneficial. And here we are talking about the beneficial. And this is also making Europe relevant to its citizens. We cannot make Europe relevant by preaching about Nie wieder Krieg, no more war. I mean, younger generations don't buy that. They want to see a European Union which is delivering real results.
Manuel Valls, if I can come to you, because there was a very specific point within that list that Mark Rutte just gave of energy, capital markets, digital services was in there as well, protected professions. The notion of the Polish plumber and the fear thereof was something that emerged often in earlier French elections. And France is not the only economy to be concerned about the free movement of services and professions, but it is surely a critical area to make progress in the future if jobs are going to be created in Europe in any sort of continuing large way. Where do you think France is going to stand on the push towards the Services Directive?
La meilleure place, j'espère.
I hope we'll be in best position.
Nous sommes passés très vite d'un sujet à...
We've jumped very quickly from one subject to the next, the historic movement in which we find ourselves, and which is the current experience, because basically Europe may not have been conceived in order to face up to such powerful crises as that of the refugees or the terrorist menace. And I want to say this, we will have to live for decades or for many years with this menace, this threat, and that's why it's a war. And there are many generations that will have to live with this. And the crisis will have to be managed in North Africa, in Africa, and in the Mideast, in the Near East. We won't be able to solve the problem of Syria in a few days. We have to have the right means to intervene there. But we have to live with this. It's part of our lives now. It's this challenge, and it is the feeling that history can be tragical, and Europe could very well break up in a very short time. We have to be realistic. I'm very grateful to the work done by the Dutch presidency and the Commission to take on these challenges. But we have to show solidarity, a lot of solidarity, also with the countries in the front line, Italy, Greece, which already has its own many challenges to deal with. And then there's the economy. There's also the economic crisis that has done a lot of damage, and every state, every country has to take on its own responsibilities to reduce the public debt, to free the market, and to make sure that there's less regulation so that there can be more job creation, more economic activity. But at this point in time, we cannot wait for the next financial crisis to occur, or to wait to see what the consequences are or in the world economy, like what's happening in China and so on. We, I think, have to absolutely create this wealth in the service sector. On energy and digital, I do agree that we need to create the conditions for a true common market. For example, with regard to digital, there's still the question of protecting digital data, personal data, there's culture. Europe was able to create its common market, and now we have to, first of all, have the proper conditions for the economy today, and also pave the way for the future and have more integration.
There are so many, as you said, so many topics we've got to cover. We're jumping from one to the other, so I apologize for having to treat each one so rapidly. But let me bring Alexis Tsipras, Prime Minister Tsipras, in here, because Greece is right in the middle of some profound structural changes, including to professions, including to very protected, what were previously protected sectors of the economy, as well as to pensioners, to the farming sector, etc. And I'm wondering how confident you are that Greece is going to be able to make this next step. And if it's going to be as difficult as I think you have said it's going to be, are there more things that the EU could be doing to be helping Greece in this moment of transition?
It is a fact that in recent years, Greece has made huge efforts with a view to its proceeding with an unprecedented fiscal consolidation. And this was unfortunately unilateral, one-sided for some groups of citizens, some groups of working people and pensioners. As a result thereof, we lost about 25% of our GDP. So instead of growth, we had lack of growth, and at the same point in time, unemployment rates skyrocketed from 7% in 2008, when the unemployment rate in Greece was the same as in Germany. Now the unemployment rate is 25%, and in Germany it's 4.5% instead. And thus, Greece needs considerable structural reforms to happen. We all need to understand that next to having balanced budgets, we also have to have growth. And in order to have growth, we need European investment and private investments. We need structural reforms to make sure that we put in place the necessary framework with a view to combating bureaucracy, corruption, with a view to modernizing the public administration. We also need incentives with a view to having private investment schemes happen. And we also need important steps to be made in order for the state to rebuild itself. But amongst anything, or rather on top of anything, we need stability. Stability for the sake of the people, to make sure that we put an end to this uncertainty that prevails. And you see, for Europe to be able to make progress, it has to have an integrated growth agenda. And Europe has to help undo or diminish inequalities between the countries in the south and the north of Europe. When you try to get a loan, a business loan in Greece, the interest rate is 7% in Greece, and it's 1% up north. So we have to put in place rules, fiscal and other rules. We need to deal with high unemployment. It's impossible to have at the very heart of the Eurozone, at the very heart of Europe, countries that have huge unemployment rates. We have to make more steps ahead. We need more Europe. We have to be more realistic. We have to be more, show more solidarity too. Thank you.
Mr. Schäuble, how do we make this transition? You were famously caught in the eye of the storm back in June, July, August of last year, at the height of the Greek Eurozone crisis. And it is striking that there are such different performances between different parts of the Eurozone. And I'm wondering what ways can solidarity, which is a phrase that's cropped up a lot in the context of the refugee issue, and you used the term yourself, how does solidarity manifest itself within the context of the kind of challenges faced by Greece and a number of other countries that are struggling in particular to emerge from the Eurozone crisis? What is solidarity to you as the finance minister of Germany in the context of what Greece is going through?
Well, we have to help every European country that doesn't manage to solve its own problems, and to do this by solidarity, and that's what we've done in the case of the Eurozone crisis, and we'll continue to do so. Of course, the problems have to be analyzed very carefully, what their genesis is. My concern has for a long time been that we in Europe, because of the speed of changes in global changes, And the World Economic Forum has as a title the fourth revolution, the fourth industrial revolution. I don't think that we have to help the European states to become as competitive as possible and not reduce their competitivity. And of course, this is not easy to manage. I can only speak about my own country. I don't like to talk about the problems of other countries unless I'm forced to do so. We are currently in a relatively good situation, but it's only very passing. The Central European Bank has adopted a policy which I'm not criticizing, and we have contracts and treaties for the economic and financial policies, but they are not being respected, but they have to be respected for as long as we don't have the institutions for them. Because of the low rate of exchange for Germany with the euro, we are in a different situation than in Greece, where it is too high. I cannot change certain things, so we have a certain problem. We underestimate our problems. We have a critical demography. We have a rate of social contributions that weighs on households that is at the limit of what is bearable. And I think that in Europe, solidarity has to be that we all do what we can to make Europe stronger. But it starts with agreements being respected, agreements which were elaborated with great difficulty. Now, in connection with the banking sector, just remember how we found it difficult to create the Single Resolution Fund and the directive for the banks, and the banking crisis that didn't start with the Lehman Brothers in Europe. Did we say never would the taxpayer have to assume the crisis and the difficulties of banks? It's banks that should do this. And now bail-in is happening because we didn't prepare ourselves for it and has created a lot of instability. So my advice is, if we want to make Europe stronger, then we should implement what we agreed to implement. And we can simply say, implementation stupid.
Change, you said there's certain things we can't change. If I may ask you one quite specific question. I've always been struck that Germany has been one of the countries most insistent in having the IMF be part of the Greek answer, and the Netherlands. And the Netherlands. Will you enjoy the question as well then? The Netherlands and Germany have been most insistent on having the IMF inside the package of loans to Greece, and yet the IMF is saying we will only continue, or we'll only disburse the next tranche if there are steps taken to restructure the debt. 187, 185%, is that a form of solidarity, or is that something that you could change, or that Eurozone members could tackle? Let me go first.
That's exactly the problem. The participation of the IMF and the former finance minister of France, who is here today, and the German finance minister, who is sitting up here, were not that much in favor of having the IMF being part of all that, but the German chancellor was in favor of it, and she was right in the end. Well, it's always like that. The heads of government are always right, and the finance ministers are never right, or hardly ever. But the European institutions simply did not have the strength to enforce what had been agreed. Now, the parliaments have decided that the IMF has to be a participant in these deals. Now, if this has to be changed, then I'd have to go to the German parliament and ask them to bless that again. And everyone in Germany would ask me whether I'd be gone crazy, because I'd be going into a room filled with dynamite with a lit candle. But this is everything that has been clarified in many debates and discussions.
I want to make sure that we have time to get to the audience and our other participants for questions. I want to bring in Emma Marchegaglia first. I'm sure Mr. Tsipras will want to come back as well. Let me let Marchegaglia come in first. We'll take a couple of quick points on this, but try and keep them short. But Emma Marcegaglia, you may want to comment on this. I also wanted you to say something perhaps about energy.
I want to say something about what we expect, what we need to do for, enhancing growth, because this is, in my opinion, the point. So I agree on the fact that we need more Europe, as we said, so energy union, digital union. On energy union, we have been talking a lot since a very long time about this. We need it because, as we know, we are importing 50% of oil and gas. We began 63. The price is very high. So if we have the real, energy union, this will help, and will have also competitiveness. Digital is very important. We are facing the fourth revolution. There is a huge opportunity, but if we lose this opportunity, we risk to lose 10% of our manufacturing system. So we really need to work on this, and we need to do it in a very fast way. And I would like also to underline that, in our opinion, national government in Europe and also the Commission should focus more on competitiveness. Sometimes we lose this point because if you look at, for example, the foreign direct investment, we used to attract 40% of the flows in Europe. 10 years ago, now we are 17. We are lacking behind on resurgent investment. We need less regulation and we need more innovation. Let me just say a joke, because in my opinion it's important. If there is an innovation, an American will say, why? Let's make a success out of it. A Chinese will say, sorry to say that, let's copy it. And a European will say, let's regulate it. So I think we have to change this kind of attitude, because if we don't do this, we are facing, we know this very well, a very big discontinuity. We are facing an unprecedented changes in also the way to make manufacturing, to manage companies. So we have to change the way we look at the competitiveness, to look to regulation, to tax and levies. In my opinion, this is a key point. And we'd like to see the Commission and the national government to focus more on this point.
Thank you. Look, I know that the Prime Minister Tsipras will want to come back, and maybe Mr. Rutte will want to amplify. I'm going to give you all a chance to come back and say things. But as we've got distinguished guests and participants at the WEF here, let's see if we can take a couple of questions. I'm going to try and see them because it's quite hard with the light here. But please do stand up, say who you are. We'll take maybe 3 or 4, and then give an opportunity here to our panelists to come back. So I can see one right in the middle. And I can see one there towards the back. So gentlemen in the middle, keep your hand up, please. Oh, yes. In fact, I know who it is. So hopefully this will save me having to ask a question later on, I'm hoping, if you do get the microphone to that person there. OK, it's coming the other way, please, the other way. There you go. And then one at the back over there, please.
Thank you. Roland Wright. How important is it for Europe that Britain remains in? And could I just humbly suggest to you that if you want Britain to stay in, it could be really helpful if you could tell our voters that Britain has influence and has value in the European Union.
Okay, so just hold that thought for 1 minute, because if we start answering each of the questions, we won't get any more in. Yeah, please, gentleman there.
Davide Serra from Algebris Investments. At a time where we have 400-500 million markets, and we're looking at refugees of the order of 1 to 2 million, wouldn't it be smart to relax the Stability Pact in Europe and allow those countries that are investing in protecting the border and welcoming refugees in creating like what the Marshall Plan was done after the Second World War? Let's create 1-2 million homes across Europe to give these guys jobs, to make our country safer. Wouldn't be this a smart way of helping the economy? And that's a question for Mr. Schäuble.
For Mr. Schäuble. Okay. That's a very targeted one. I'm going to take one more right at the back. There's a gentleman right at the back. Everyone's been quite shy this morning, actually. There we go. Right at the back, please. Good. You have to keep your hand up so then they can see where you are. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Ali Al-Mansouri. I work for Abu Dhabi Economic Development. My question is on the fiscal policy side in Europe. Can Europe implement one united fiscal policy relative to the monetary policy that has been implemented in the past? Thank you.
Right. Let's take a few of these questions. And let me start, if I may, with the two to Mr. Schäuble. Then we'll come back to the UK and Brexit. one fiscal policy, and the issue of should there be a relaxation of Stability Pact in solidarity with those who are carrying a bigger burden. We could relax it for Germany. That would be perfect.
Well, first of all, let me answer that question about setting up a kind of a Marshall Plan. Well, that's more or less what I suggested, but we don't need it for Europe. We need the Marshall Plan for the regions that have been destroyed, and it would only make sense. Look, I was born 1942, and I have some memories of what Europe was like when the Marshall Plan was in discussion, and the amounts were quite different. I didn't want to use the term Marshall Plan, but we knew we need something similar. We will have to invest billions into the countries of origin of the refugees in order to reduce the pressure, the migratory pressure on Europe. And then what we would need is a plan of this kind. And of course, we would need a common fiscal policy in Europe. But Europe moves very slowly. It's a complex being. But if you see how global institutions move, by comparison, Europe is still very, very effective. And that's why we're a model and not the greatest problem of globalization. But the first step that we would have to remember is that we have treaties and we have made agreements, and they have to be respected. If they are respected, then we have enough confidence and trust in one another to continue. In the long run, we cannot have a common market with a common currency, and we only have a common monetary policy without having a common stability as well. And we have seen where this leads. So maybe we have now realized that we have to change it more rapidly.
Thank you. Mr. Rutte, let me come to you on that question. I mean, you've been perhaps unfairly called Britain's best friend, but you did represent David Cameron at the Malta, didn't you, at the Malta? Well, there you go. At the Malta summit, it did happen once. But especially with the presidency of the EU right now, how would you answer that question about, I saw a Dutch writer say, is it really up to the rest of Europe to help Britain, or is it the other way around? But in any case, I'll let you answer your question.
And then even a combination of the United Kingdom and the Netherlands is smaller than Germany. But at least together we are the second economy. Now, I do believe that we need the United Kingdom to stay in the European Union. The United Kingdom is outward-looking, is trade-oriented, is growth-oriented, and we do not have enough of that storyline, of that tradition, of that culture within the European Union. And the European Union can only survive if it is relevant to its people, and it is only relevant to its people if the European Union leads not only to safety, but also to economic growth and more jobs and more prosperity. And for the United Kingdom itself, it is also crucial. I believe the United Kingdom outside the European Union will be worse off. It will not have the influence it has in the world it has today. And isn't it strange to even debate a Brexit at a time when the world is facing all these huge issues and challenges, that you would then debate for a big economy and a big democracy as the United Kingdom to leave this influential position within the European Union. And yes, to your other question, the United Kingdom is influential. David Cameron is influential. He is an excellent prime minister. He is making his points in the European Council. He has a lot of credibility and a lot of influence there. And we would all be worse off if he would leave. And it is not us keeping him on or he keeping himself on. We have together to make sure that we get to a deal which is better for the 28, which for the 28 creates a European Union which is more competitive, more outward-looking, and more growth-oriented. If we could achieve that, then this whole episode will have a positive ending.
Are you relatively optimistic about the upcoming summit? I'm not going to. If I ask you a question about the 4 points of negotiation, you'll push them to one side. So let me ask you a question about how optimistic you feel about February and the kind of timelines that are being talked about now.
I'm fairly optimistic. I'm not absolutely sure that we will get there in February, but I think we could. I'm fairly optimistic that we get to an outcome. I'm fairly optimistic that we will get to an outcome, a positive outcome in February. And I'm also fairly optimistic about the result of a referendum in the UK. I hope that everybody of you, business leaders, community leaders, sitting here, having influence in the United Kingdom, that you will participate in that debate. Don't leave it only to the politicians. You should not preach. That will never work, except for you when you are a preacher. But you should not preach. But to explain to the British public why it is important, in your view, for the UK to be part of the European Union, influence-wise, growth-wise, economy-wise, the city-wise, that would be of tremendous value in that referendum process.
We only have 5 minutes left, and I want to give an opportunity to each of our speakers to, as we didn't have more questions from the floor, to share some last thoughts. There may be some points they wanted to pick up from earlier comments. But if I could lead in with you, Mr. Valls, and ask you in particular about this idea that Britain's put forward, that it wants to be in a reformed Europe. Is it really all about meeting British demands, or is it also about reform of the EU in the way that you would like to see? Are there aspects of the reform agenda that the British government is pushing, whether it be on representation of national parliaments, whether it be on the competitiveness agenda, trade? Are there aspects that you and France are particularly supportive of for a kind of reformed Europe that you also agree with?
After having said so much about the challenges and the crises, and just as I said, it would be a historic, mortal error for Europe to have let Greece leave the Eurozone. In the current situation, to see the UK leave Europe would be a tragedy. A tragedy, and I'm saying this as a Frenchman. There are relationships between our countries and Britain. These are historic relations, and we have to do everything that we can that will make Britain stay, and the British people in the European Union, not at just any conditions. That would be senseless. There are certain demands or requests from Britain that are acceptable. Have a Europe that is more simple, that works better, that is more effective. So anything that we can agree with would not only be good for Great Britain, for the UK, but also for the whole of Europe. So we have to find a compromise, and everyone can contribute to that. I hope that the summit in February will at least help us to make decisive steps forward. But at the same time, we may not forget that there are things that have not worked well up until now. In a general way, we often forget, too often, that Europe is the first economic power. It has 3 billion GNP. It is a large economic and financial area, and there are things that can be strengthened here. We could have a more favorable policy for job creation, and what Mr. Schäuble said with regard to the economic strategy of the European Union. We can go further there, and that is what our British friends have to hear and understand. We want to strengthen the financial power of the real economy, that digital and ecological issues are in the public and private economy. We have to have more convergence in the Eurozone before we can have more convergence between the Eurozone countries and the others. We have to also have more fiscal convergence. Since the question was put by someone about fiscal policy, Mr. Schäuble perfectly well knows how this works in Europe and in the European Union. We are a federation of nation-states. There are interests in every state, and the German parliament has a very important, essential role to play. And all of this cannot move too fast. We cannot overturn the apple cart. We have to make sure that every state can move at its pace as well. But there is a sense of urgency, and our British friends have to understand that we will move ahead hand in hand through dialogue. We have to bear in mind that history is now at a moment of convergence. All the parameters that you mentioned at the beginning, such as the dangers, the threats, terrorism, the refugee crisis, the migratory crisis, Ukraine, separatism, the risk of separatism, the rise of populism, nothing could be worse than to see a country, a member state leave, because it would be a signal to others and would simply pave the way for more populism. So we have a collective responsibility at this historic moment. All of us, all these member states, we need more Europe, and Europe should be more audacious, should take more initiative. If we don't, then this whole wonderful undertaking of peace and friendship will founder, and that would be a great shame. So it's not just a question of negotiation. We also have to realize that this is a historic moment.
So last comment. We are already on time, so if you could keep it short, what would be your final thought about what you'd like to see Europe achieving over this coming year?
Yes, I will respond to that, but please allow me to make a brief comment because I've been meaning to make that previously. I'm not in favor of trying to bring a candle, a lit candle, in a room full of dynamite. But then again, due to that reason, I don't think that we have to keep ourselves in the dark. The best possible solution is to make sure that you get rid of the dynamite that's in the room and then lit the candle. Now, when it comes to the fund, it's true that not everyone agreed on the importance of the contribution of the IMF in European developments. We are not snobbish vis-à-vis the IMF. It's just that we thought that Europe could have done things on its own. It could have done things properly, but despite that, there's been a lot of water under the bridge. There's been a long debate. We've heard different views. Some countries, some EU partners asked that the IMF be involved. We agreed in order to have the agreement, and now we are doing everything we can in order for us to smoothly and promptly proceed with implementation of the agreement. I'm hopeful and I wish that the coexistence of three different institutions will prove positive. I know there's disagreements between and amongst themselves on occasion. There's a different perception in the way they understand European things, and hopefully such disagreements will not allow for further delays. Let me also refer to competitiveness. I've been listening to what is being said very carefully, but next to wishing us to become more competitive, i.e. become more competitive than our neighbors, we also have to talk about productivity. We have to become more productive. We have to become more efficient and effective, which means that we will be improving ourselves, and then that will also prove beneficial for our neighbors. So when it comes to productivity and competitiveness, it's not just important to bear in mind what the labor costs might be. In order for an economy to be competitive, we have a set of parameters that need to be taken into account, and that is why I'm very happy to notice that in Greece there is an agreement amongst all productive forces and entities. The government has agreed with all working people to share the burden with the society, and the social contributions will increase slightly so as to make sure that we will not slash the pensions yet again. Allow me to just say one thing, I'll be done shortly. In order for us to find a solution to the problems of Europe, we need more Europe. This is not the right time to talk about exits, be they Grexits, Brexits, or any sort of differences and discrepancies and differentiations. We have to have one Europe, a deeper Europe that will be democratic, showing solidarity. We also need to increase our budgets to diminish social inequalities. We have to have a European bank deposits guarantee systems. We have to find a common solution to our shared problem that is unemployment. It's high time, therefore, for us to go back to the founding principles of Europe, the ones that got it established after two wars and a big financial crisis. We have to count on democracy, solidarity, and social cohesion.
Thank you. We've got time just for very short comments, please, Minister Schäuble, if I could. I'll let you make a final view, perhaps a response to one of the other points or something on Brexit, or whether you're comfortable with the idea of a multi-currency union. However you'd like to do it, if a final comment from you, please.
Also,
Well, I hope the British will decide to stay in Europe and with us. It's in the interest of Britain, and certainly I'm convinced it's in the interest of Europe. It would be a disaster otherwise. As for the situation in Europe, there are two alternatives, and I'll repeat it. Either we strengthen the European institutions so that they have more rights, and for that we would amend the treaties, and not all member states will be in favor of this because it's a question of transferring some of their sovereignty to the European institutions, and some states find this rather difficult, and we have to respect this. Or we have to make do with agreements. And as in all democracies, these would have to be agreements that have to be signed off by national parliaments, and that is a basis of democracy. That would be the only way that it could be done. But I feel that the European institutions have to be strengthened. I am a realist. We cannot wait until we get these amendments of the treaties, like the Lisbon Treaty. There are too many crises that need to be seen to. So we have to take on what is most urgent. Let's call it a Marshall Plan or something else. Invest billions in the regions in crisis in order to reduce this migratory pressure on Europe.
So stronger institutions, a Europe of stronger institutions or more agreements? Which one would you go for, Emma Marcegaglia?
Stronger institutions.
Okay.
But can I say just one point on Brexit? I think, as Mr. Rutte said, this could be a disaster for Europe, but I think could be a disaster also for UK, because I think UK took a strong advantage of taking part of the common single market, and if they are not there, they will not do it. And just one final word on how I see Europe. As I said, more Europe, less inward-looking, more outward-looking. I agree with Mr. Tsipras that at the end we need a fiscal common capacity, we need a deposit guarantee common, we need more investment, common European investment, conditional to the fact that all the single, governments, all the single state will do the reforms that we need to have more competitiveness and a common capacity.